Have you always lived in Houston?
Yeah. Born and raised, I grew up in an area called Spring, and then that's in North Houston, and then we live a little bit north now in an area called Magnolia.
Okay. So you have the pictures are like, do you guys go to a lot of games? We just obviously
Mm.
moved to Phoenix. So it's like Diamondbacks. We have the Cardinals. Like those aren't the teams that I like, but obviously going to games is fun. Do you guys go to a lot of games?
I went to a lot of games during COVID, to be honest with you, because the
Yeah.
season tickets were like extremely cheap.
Yep.
I'll usually go to a game a season, but to be honest, it's kind of hard to beat the in-home experience. It
Yes.
really is. I used to sit cage side when I was filming, doing a lot of marketing and media production for a regional MMA gym here, or not gym, excuse me, a regional promotion. So I would sit cage side, and then I did some stuff in Strike Force before they got bought out by the UFC. And so I've gone to the UFC fights like in person, but it's hard to beat like being cage side or being in your home.
Yes.
So typically, like, it's kind of how I feel about the NFL. It's like there's just so many things at your disposal and the comfort level.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah, I went to a UFC fight maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago with my father-in-law, and obviously it's great. It's so cool, like the intros, all that, but you're like, the audio experience is just so much
yes,
better at home.
yes, it
But
is.
well, Justin, I'm so pumped to have you on and anyone listening to this. This is Conversations, and really in 2020, I saw, especially in the church, a lot of people had a lot of monologues, a lot of people had a lot of opinions. It was like, how do I create a space for people in ministry, people not in ministry, people who don't believe in Jesus? Anybody can sit down and simply model what it looks like to have a genuine conversation. So, Justin, one, super thankful for you to be on. Two, would you just maybe give us a rundown of who are you, what do you do, what are you passionate about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, where do I start? So let's see here. I was I've always been extraordinarily average, I would say. My father was a blue collar electrician. My mom homeschooled us. Sort of was entrepreneurial at a young age, just out of necessity, right? I loved being involved in church, but my parents were like, "Hey, listen, we want you to go to youth camp, but can't afford for you to go to youth camp. So if you want to go, you got to pay for it." And
Yeah.
so I'd figure out ways to, whether it be mowing lawns or going door to door and in the nicer, more affluent neighborhoods and saying, "Hey, can I wash your windows?" And so I just learned how to make money at an early age. But my passion was really like I wanted to be in ministry. I felt God
Mhm.
called me into ministry when I was 11 years old at a summer camp.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I sort of became an old soul. It felt like I just wanted to be a pastor. And so I got into full time vocational ministry. I was a youth pastor, I was a creative pastor, associate pastor, and then ended up being an executive pastor. And then you're sort of following that pathway, right? Like, hey,
Mhm.
you're going to be a lead pastor. And I had a lot of people tell me, because of that entrepreneurial spirit, if you will. I had one guy tell me he was part of we grew up in the Assemblies of God. And so the Church Multiplication Network, you're familiar with that. One
Yeah.
of the guys told me, like, hey, you're like the prototype wiring for church planting. He was like, hey, if you want to plant churches, let me know it. I just I just never felt like God tapped me on the shoulder. And so I just sort of doing our thing, serving at a church. And my pastor sat me down one day. We were actually driving, and I still remember where we were. We were like parked next. We were at a four-way stop, and there was a Walgreens, and then there's a Chili's to my right hand side. And he said, Justin, I, you would be a fine lead pastor. I really think you'd be a great lead pastor." And that was kind of our plan, right? Should I plant a campus? Should they plant us as as a church, autonomous church? He said, "But it is evident to me that God continues to bless you in business and give you influence in business. And I think that your contribution to the kingdom will be much greater through your influence in business than it would be you being a pastor of a local church."
Mhm.
And I remember just sitting in the car that day at that stoplight, and I was like, you know what? I had never even thought about that. It's not what this caught me totally off guard, right? But he was right. He was right. And about 10 months later, I ended up stepping down from the staff because we had launched a platform called Ministry Pass, and it just kind of taken off. and we were off to the races. And it just got to the point where my life was compartmentalized, right? I had my church life and our new business life, startup life, and my foot was in each boat. And it's just hard to keep your balance in the water if you got a foot in each boat. So I had to pick one. And so, fast forward today, I think we've had over 3 million downloads of our resources, churches all over the world. So, you know what? He was right.
Well, I love that so much. And we really didn't talk about this, but most of the conversations I have, like, yes, sure, we have pastors on here, but a lot of times because of my background, like I'm entrepreneurial and kind of in that space as well, it is entrepreneurship. Like that is something that I love talking about. It's kind of fun. My father-in-law, mother-in-law, both are entrepreneurs. My wife and I both are very entrepreneurial. So even on that journey with you, like what have you learned along the journey that you wish you would have known at the beginning when your pastors? And it's funny. It's like you always got to mention Chili's, right? Like God spoke right
Yeah.
next to Chili's. So I don't know
Yeah,
if there's
right.
a word for somebody on there, but I'm just kidding. Yeah, like what have you learned along the journey? What is something that, man, you're still like deep diving and discovering of like the importance of, yeah, sure, team building, all that side of it, but also just the practical, maybe the product side of things.
You know, so there's a story. It's a little bit of a longer story, but it will make it worth it. At least I hope for everyone listening. Th-
100%.
So I was during this time. So let me back up like I don't know, 4 months before he told me this. I got approached by this company, and they were the most eccentric bunch I had ever met. And so they they said, "Hey, we got your name from a guy. I was working as doing marketing for an MMA promotion that was a regional circuit, sort of a minor league to the UFC. And
Mhm.
so we got your name from somebody associated with there, and we want to speak to you about a project. Can you come to our office?" I said, "Sure." And at the time, I was really burned. I was really tired. I had about a dozen church clients. We were doing all of the digital communications, the creative, it's sort of design pickle for churches, if you will, before design pickle was a thing. But I was tired. I had not figured out a way to productize our services. And so my selling point was a great selling point, the the worst business model. And my selling point was, hey, we're like one of your staff. Whatever you need, we'll get it done. And that was like music to their ears, right? But for us, it was just so unpredictable. And so I was just running ragged. And I get a call from these guys. And so I go to their office. And when I pull up, there's a Maserati, there's a Lamborghini, there's a Bentley, there's a Rolls Royce, there's a Ferrari. There's literally every exotic car you can think of. And I was going, man, what in the world? So I knock on the door, and this young girl that looks like she's 5 minutes over 18 years old answers the door with an iPad in her hand and says, "Good morning, Mr. Trapp. Can I get you a Red Bull?" Literally the first words out of her mouth. And I was, and there's bumping music. It's like, it sounds like a club in this business. Just, oomch, oomch, oomch. And I walk in, I'm going, what on earth? So there's everyone there is really pretty. They're all dressed to the nines, guys walking around in like crisp suits. And there's TVs hanging down and sports center, and there's pool tables. And I'm just going, what on earth? So she says, the CEOs, they had a co-CEO situation. CEOs will meet you in a second. You can go up to this room. So she walked me up there. I'm sitting in this room, and there are swords, like Braveheart, William Wallace type swords all over the walls. And then something caught my eye. And on a whiteboard in the back of the room, it said, "Is Justin Trapp the next leader? Question mark. And I was like, what? So these guys are energy brokers, and they are loud and they are boisterous. And because of that, they will wear these nice crisp suits, but then they have their logo for their energy broker service look like an energy drink logo. Like it looked like something that would be um like a Mountain Dew type, like a Monster Energy type logo. And so they would wear these ball caps with this logo, and then these crisp suits, and then they'd show up in a Rolls Royce. And so people were always inquisitive, like, who are you guys? Like, what do you do? And they thought that the power was in the logo. They're like, people want this culture. They want this DNA that we have. And so what they wanted me to do is they wanted me to create this lifestyle brand. And it was kind of and they offered me, this is like what, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, they offered me like 85K to work from home, and that was I mean, I was used to like a youth pastor salary, right? So
Right. Oh, yeah.
I was like, man, this is crazy. So I told my wife, either these guys plucked me like from obscurity to be some fall guy for some money laundering, or God is giving me a way out, like of where I was just so tired and exhausted, and He's allowing me to replace myself. And so I prayed about it, and I was like, you know what, let's go for it, let's do it. So I immediately took all the money I was paying myself and hired people to replace myself in our existing business, and I started working for these guys, and it was a wild ride. They sent me all over Texas to all these different energy drink manufacturers, energy shot manufacturers, and they had these like acronyms. So like they're I don't know how specific I should be here, but just to give you a clue, have you ever seen Entertainment 720? I think it's Parks and Rec.
Yeah,
This is like Entertainment 720 in real life. Like these guys, like this is
sort of.
them in real life. They are dead serious. And so they wanted me to have this. They were like, hey, we want an energy drink. And they would come up with these like sayings. They were like, hey, we got to keep everything point 0.2 around here. Like a marathon is not 26 miles, it's 26.2 miles. So we got to keep everything creme de la creme,
Mm.
keep it point 0.2 because we're chasing greatness around here. We want everyone to be future old money. Like they had all these like isms, right?
Right.
These little slogans. And I went to one of their company meetups for my first time. I just joined the team. They have all their salespeople there, and they brought this young lady to the front of the room who's like in this mini skirt. She gets on her hands and knees, and they knight her with this giant sword as part of their promotion. And they like yell, and he like raises the sword in the air like William Wallace, and everyone like cheers. And I was like,
Right.
what is happening? They gave one guy $50,000 in a briefcase because he hit it like as a bonus. And I was just like, this is bizarro. And so they sent me all over the country. I know this is a long story, but here's where
Oh,
I'm
love
getting
it.
at. So I mean, I learned far more about 5-hour energy than I ever cared to know, but they have an absolute monopoly on energy shots. Then they wanted me to pivot. And it's like, we don't think we can break into the energy shot market based on all your research. We want you to become Under Armour. I'm like, okay, great. Like, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
I'll I'll get right to it.
Something
So
simple.
yeah, I started learning all about Under Armour. And then they wanted me to pivot towards apparel. So they were always having me pivot, but I believe though that God really used them to stretch me. Cause I remember this one conversation I had with them that was so pivotal. Cause I'd be in these meetings and they would say things like, Justin, that's a $3 million idea. We need $100 million ideas out of you, not $3
Wow.
million ideas. And I would call my wife on the way home, like, you'll never guess what these guys said, right? And so I remember this phone conversation. I was on my porch and they called me and they just basically challenged me and they said, listen, Justin, we like you. We picked you for a reason. We believe in you, but you're managing our business like it's your business, and your business is small. Our business is big. We need you to manage our business like it's our business. I just remember hanging up the phone, realizing that if Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert,
Mm. Great
yeah,
book.
yeah. If there was like a rich entrepreneur, poor entrepreneur mindset, I had the poor entrepreneur mindset,
Mhm.
and it occurred to me in that moment, like I'm thinking too small, and so they challenged me to think bigger. They wanted me uh to sponsor an upcoming UFC fighter, Holly Holm, who eventually became champion. This is before Holly Holm was champion, and we all knew her on the regional from the regional minor league circuit that I was a part of. So we knew that she was on a collision course with Ronda Rousey, and so they wanted to get in early. So they wanted me to sponsor her. The problem was at the time the UFC basically ran its sponsorships like the mafia. In order to sponsor Holly Holm, because this was before they cleaned it up. Now they don't do this. They have all the uniforms, but in the older days they allowed like patches and logos to go on the shorts, and then the fight corner would drop the
Like the
banner.
banner. Yeah.
Yeah. So in order to be one of those sponsors, you had to pay the UFC $250,000 just for the rights to do so. They didn't include what you had to pay Holly Holm.
Wow.
And so they wanted us to sponsor Holly Holm, and I tried to pull connections. I said, listen, they said, we want you to sponsor Holly Home and we don't want to pay the $250,000. And I was like, guys, there's no way. And they're like, no, there's always a way. There's always a way. You just have to figure out what motivates people. So I went round and round. And then I remember one day they came in, it was credit to them. It was their idea, not my idea. And they said, we got it. Here's what we're going to do. Holly trains at Jackson Winklejohn Academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. One of the most prolific MMA gyms in the world. John Jones is there. A lot of big champs there. Call them and offer to get them new jiu-jitsu mats, new punching bags, a new octagon. The only catch is we get to put our logo on everything, because here's what we're thinking. There will continue to be more champions that will be churning out of there. They'll be produced there. The UFC is always going to be filming there. B-roll, interviews. We'll just get our logo in the background. And I'll be darned, several months, probably a year later after I had left, I was watching like a countdown to the UFC, and
Yep.
there it was, their logo in the background.
It's insane.
And so I would say, so the lesson is to think much larger. And I think that God used that time, even though it was wild and it was quirky and it was weird and it was eccentric. I mean, they were eccentric as all get out, but God used that to really stretch me on what I was capable of as an entrepreneur. And so consequently, when we went to launch Ministry Pass, it is so funny. I used that experience from them. I remember I heard my son's heartbeat for the first time. I was standing on the patio of a hotel cottage in Madagascar. My wife we just found out she's pregnant. I was already scheduled to go on this missions trip, and her first ultrasound appointment, luckily I had Wi-Fi that day, and I heard my son's heartbeat from halfway around the world. And I realized, like, hey, if you're going to do this thing that you're thinking about, a Ministry Pass, you need to do it now. And so I began working while on this mission trip on the flight home. And I remember sitting in the Johannesburg airport, and I was like, like what should we do? So I thought of like, let me reach out to someone that's a known commodity that has trust. So I thought of Mark Batterson, and I just went to markbatterson.com, he's a New York Times bestselling author. He's a pastor. He's a great guy. Don't know him from Adam. And I tried to think, like, how would these guys approach Mark Batterson? And so in my contact form, I just said, hey, Mark, I want to do this big launch event. I want to teach pastors. I want to help them with their preaching. I would love to come to Washington, D.C. and film you. I'll buy 300 copies of your new book that's coming out the week of the launch if you'll let us come and film you for an hour. And he said yes.
Wow.
And then from there, we were sort of off to the races. And I think I really have to credit my time with them, because I don't think we would have launched really big the way that we did. But the day that we launched Ministry Pass, we were trending on Twitter. There was, COVID has been the rage, right? But people forget about Ebola. Ebola was like a big thing. And I still have this screenshot on my hard drive. There's the trending topics on Twitter that day. Second place is Ebola. Right above that is Ministry Pass. So I know there's a very long story. I don't even feel like this is really much of a conversation. I'm just kind of storytelling,
I
but
love it. No, it's so impactful. And in what I'm hearing you say even is there's got to be a level as an entrepreneur. Sure, yes, as a Christian too, but there's got to be a level of confidence in what you're selling, and including yourself. Like when you walk into a room as an entrepreneur, as a leader, and even apply this in the church context, like as a leader in the church, like my wife and I lead in our church. We're planting a new church in August 11th in Phoenix. And it's like, man, if I walk in and I'm flat-footed and I'm insecure and I'm not secure in who God's created me to be, it's really not probably going to be very successful. And nobody else around me also is going to be confident in who they are and secure in who God's made them to be. So for you, like as you're having conversations with churches and you're meeting with pastors and you're teaching them how to communicate and articulate the words in a better way, like what are you learning along the way that, man, if you could tell 50,000 leaders across the world one or two things right now, like what would that be?
As it relates to communication
And leadership. It even applies to the church.
I will say this, something that's been on my heart a lot lately for leaders is from a book I just read called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. And really, this concept of we hire people for our organizations to try to grow our organizations, and the theory in this book is, listen, like no one can grow it like you can grow it. And so what you need to do as a leader is to don't hire people to grow your organization or grow your ministry or grow your business. Hire them to buy back your time, because you are the multiplier, not the addition. And if you can take all the trivial things that you're doing and the menial things that you're doing and get rid of those so that you have margin, right? Creativity exists in margin. If you can buy that margin for yourself, for your life, your business, your ministry, your church will be far more successful because of that margin. And then you can focus on the things that only you can really speak to, whether it's vision, it's a leadership, it's strategic direction. Like you can't outsource those things.
Mhm.
You can't. You can outsource social media. You can outsource bookkeeping. You can outsource a lot of things, but you can't outsource those things. So if you can get to a place where you can outsource a lot of those things that you're currently handling, and you can delegate or outsource, and get to the place where you are focusing on truly those large lever uh, issues in your organization, you're going to be able to succeed. And one of the things you can do is you can classify your time. Do a time audit where you take a look at everything that you do, whether you attend a meeting, you write an email, you evaluate something, you preach, you create social media, like audit it all and then classify it into three buckets: $15 an hour, $100 an hour, and $1,000 an hour. And immediately, as fast as humanly possible, you need to get rid of all the $15 tasks. Just absolutely as fast as you humanly as you can. And then the $100 hour tasks are a little bit harder to get rid of, but you need to just develop a plan to get rid of those so that you are really focusing in your sweet spot, that area that is just fluent to you, that you're gifted in, that only you can speak to, because you can't outsource vision. You just can't. And so, I find that a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of pastors and a lot of leaders really, whether it's micromanaging or it's the collaborator, right? I'm the collaborator.
Mhm.
I'm involved in the details, not because I want to micromanage them, but I have fun collaborating, right?
Yeah.
B- Very different motivations, but nonetheless still involved in too many details. And you have to elevate yourself as a leader. I would say that.
A couple thoughts from what you just said too. I was listening to a seminar yesterday, pretty large, influential church in the East Coast, and he's talking about hiring and firing. And something that applies, I think, is the hiring process and the firing process, like the onboarding and offboarding. Like, what have you? I think one, most people are intimidated on their first hire, and obviously, most people are intimidated also by, especially in the church, for some reason, the firing process or the 90-day, like, hey, let's figure this out. Like, what would you tell people who are leaders, who have a staff, or who are envisioning, like, man, I got to delegate this stuff, but I'm a little nervous on making that first hire? Like, what would be some wisdom and insight that you would share to them?
You know, I think we as humans we have a tendency to hire people like ourselves, and which creates redundancy.
Mhm.
In the church space, I can speak to the church space. I think there's this tendency, and not every church, but you have the lead pastor who's typically a visionary and a strong communicator. And then a lot of times you have these major, what I would call ministries or segments of the church where you have the youth ministry, you have the kids ministry, you have the worship ministry. And I think a lot of times what churches do is the youth pastor and the kids pastor, and sometimes the worship pastor are largely, they are redundant versions or less competent versions of the lead pastor, because they're that the youth pastor really needs to have a vision for the youth ministry. The kids pastor really need, so there's this visionary component where they need to have vision, they need to have strategic direction. It's personality driven. They're a public figure essentially in that church community, and so you're hiring the first four hires at a church are like largely the same person. And I think the church becomes very redundant, and then they can't get past 100 people or 200 people because they're all weak in the same area and they're all strong in the same area. And so if you can just have that awareness that, okay,
Mhm.
whatever this role that I'm hiring, let's make sure that I'm not just hiring myself, that I'm hiring people that are competent in areas that again, those $15 an hour tasks, hire people that are really good. They enjoy those types of things, not just hiring someone that has good ideas like you.
Yeah. I love that, and that just takes self-awareness, and I've been in thousands of conversations with people across the world, and you'd be surprised how many people don't have self-awareness, especially in the church. Like, you gotta know your weaknesses to be able to hire your weaknesses. Like, I don't know.
I think I think self-awareness is one of the most important things a human being can have, whether you're in church or not, right? Because if you don't have self-awareness, I tell my wife I mean, I've told my wife this often. If someone doesn't have self-awareness, I don't have a lot of hope for them. Because that awareness allows for opportunity for growth, and that growth makes you a better human, a better leader, a better husband, better spouse, a better father. And without the awareness, that you're robbed of that opportunity for growth. And self-awareness is such a powerful thing.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, you gotta be able to know your weaknesses so you can onboard and create people in your incubator of whatever that is. It's your church, it's your business, it's your whatever you're doing, that people can actually be able to strengthen that. And also, you're always going to be the lid in your organization. And this is something we can kind of wrap up with. Like, the CEO, the lead pastor, like, you're the lid. And for us, like, even for you, how are you continuing to grow? And you've mentioned a couple books. I'm assuming that's a part of your routine. Like, where people are looking at you and saying, Justin, where are we going? And they're following your behaviors, you're following your development. Like, how can we make sure that we are consistently growing? And even if, like, you got 20 campuses, you're 55 years old, and you got 100-person staff, like, even that, like, we can't stop growing and learning and evolving as leaders and pastors and insert any sort of adjective. Like, for you, how have you evolved, and how are you continuing to? But then also, how can people listening to this evolve and make sure that they are not the lid to their organization?
Yeah. So my coach has been really helping me work through observational learning. So, you meet these people that have 20 years of experience. You really look closely though, it's 1 year of experience 20 times. And and it's because they're learning that they're going through the same mistakes, the same pains over and over again. So they just rinse and repeat with new people. It's like, oh, the person's the problem, or this church is the problem. Let me go over here. This business was the problem. Let me shut that down. Let me start a new business. And so you're just recycling the same issues. And what it takes is this observational learning where you're able to review your week, review your month, and say, hey, what worked well? What didn't work well? What would I change for this next week? I think that's a big part. I also think, I can speak to myself for the past, I would say 3 years. I was able to delegate a lot of things. I was able to get a lot off my plate. And because of that, I had more time on my hands. And it was weird because I was this sort of all-star doer, right? I was, people have called, we see these unicorns, right? They can have an idea and they can go and like I'm sort of like both visionary and operational.
Yep.
I have that competency. Uh, but what happens is when you remove all those doer tasks, I'm going, well, crap. Like, what am I supposed to do today? Like, how do I contribute today? And I became a board leader. And I think a board leader is not a good leader. It was just bored. And it took me, uh, I started working with a leadership coach, and then I developed some awareness, right? I started developing observational learning, and that awareness brings opportunities for growth. It's like, I need to grow in this area. Like I sort of, you can't unsee it. Like, you ever like
Right.
notice something in someone, or you notice something, it's like all of a sudden it's like, I've seen it, I can't unsee it.
Yep.
And once you can't unsee it, you have to change it. Like, you have to fix it. And that's kind of where I've been the past 3 years. I've been working through a journey. And so I really credit, my coaches on helping me work
Mm.
through that and grow and elevate myself as a leader. So
I love it. I mean, have a coach. Every every pastor needs a pastor. Every
yes.
leader needs a leader. Every parent needs to learn from another parent. Like, there's just this constant consideration that I would submit to anyone listening to this is, you can't do life alone. You can't lead alone. You can't pastor alone. Because the assumption is, I know it all. And even the person that's 75 years old who's been in ministry for 50 years, most of the time they say, I know nothing. Like as older as I get, the more I know, I don't know actually
Yes.
anything. My gosh. So Justin, maybe submit a couple last thoughts to our listeners. Again, it's like 18 to 25-year-olds, young leaders, people who are very driven to be in the church, to lead in the church, people who are currently pastoring a church. Like, what would you submit a few thoughts to them as we wrap up?
Hmm. I would say make sure that you have margin in your life, margin for your family, margin for yourself, margin for you to think deeply about issues and challenges and opportunities. We live in such a fast-paced, TikTok world, right? Just seconds at a time. So we're the society is not conducive for like deep thinking, deep work. But leadership, first and foremost, is about leading yourself. And part of leading yourself is really having those moments of solitude where you can have perspective, you can develop your thoughts more, you can think through critical issues. And again, I mentioned earlier, creativity exists, it lives, it thrives in margin. And so for you to be able to schedule that margin, have that margin in your life, figure out a way. For me, it's a non-negotiable in my life now.
Mhm.
I have to have parts of my day where I'm doing nothing but thinking, reading, just writing, journaling. And I will tell you, I'm the best leader I've ever been right now. And
Mhm.
it's because of that margin, I believe. And so I would challenge you. You're busy, right? Especially if you're in a startup or you're planning a church. There's a thousand things to do. I get it. I get it. But if you don't have that margin, you'll burn out, and you won't be nearly as effective as a leader or successful as a business owner. And that margin will help you grow something without burning out in the process. Because a lot of times we see people grow things and then they flail out. Uh, you can do both. You can grow a business, grow a church, have an impact, reach significance, whatever that means for you, and do it without compromising your personal vitality, I would say.
Well, I love it so much. Yeah, busyness is not a badge, it's a warning sign. Anyone listen to this? Probably remove the word busy from your language. I've actually started to apply full. Like I have a full schedule. I don't have a busy
Yes.
schedule. 'Cause I,
Yes.
busyness doesn't equal effectiveness. So thank you so much, Justin, for being on. Seriously, so much fun and hearing about everything you guys are doing. Seriously, one, so thankful you would spend time with me, and two, thank you for all the insight and wisdom that our audience I know will take a ton from. So thanks again.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.